Welcome to the Country Church Morning Service with Pastor Butch Ikels.
Got my boots on. Have you ever been to a church, Paige? You heard that? The first thing they noticed, you got your boots on. This morning, my goodness, I asked Dr. Patterson what his text was. He said all of 1 Samuel, so you're going to be standing for a while, okay? 1 Samuel, the first chapter, beginning at verse 1. 1 Samuel, chapter 1, beginning with verse 1. Those who can and will stand in honor of the Lord and His Word. Oh my goodness. He talked about all the names that you couldn't pronounce in the Old Testament. I ought to ask him to come up here and read this, but we'll go. Now there was a certain man of Ramathaim Zophim of Mount Ephraim, and his name was Elkanah, the son of Jeroham, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zuph, an Ephraimite. And he had two wives. The name of the one was Hannah, the name of the other was Peninnah, and Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. And this man went up out of his city yearly to worship and to sacrifice unto the Lord of hosts in Shiloh. And the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, the priests of the Lord, were there. And when the time was that Elkanah offered, he gave to Peninnah his wife and to all her sons and her daughters portions. But unto Hannah he gave a worthy portion. For he loved Hannah, but the Lord had shut up her womb. And her adversary also provoked her sore for to make her fret, because the Lord had shut up her womb. And as he did so year by year, when she went into the house of the Lord, so she provoked her. Therefore she wept and did not eat. Then said Elkanah, her husband, to her, Hannah, why weepest thou? And why eatest thou not? And why is thy heart grieved? Am I not better to thee than 10 sons? So Hannah rose up after they had eaten in Shiloh, and after they had drunk. Now Eli the priest sat upon a seat by the post of the temple of the Lord. And she was in bitterness of soul, and prayed unto the Lord, and wept sore. And she vowed a vow, and said, O Lord of hosts, if thou wilt indeed look on the affliction of thine handmaid, and remember me, and not forget thine handmaid, but will give unto thy handmaid a man-child, then I will give him unto the Lord all the days of his life, and there shall no razor come upon his head. And it came to pass, as she continued praying before the Lord, that Eli marked her mouth. Now Hannah, she spake in her heart, only her lips moved, but her voice was not heard. Therefore Eli thought she had been drunken. And Eli said unto her, How long wilt thou be drunken? Put away thy wine from thee. And Hannah answered and said, No, my Lord, I am a woman of a sorrowful spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I have poured out my soul before the Lord. Count not thine handmaid for a daughter of Belial, for out of the abundance of my complaint and grief have I spoken hitherto. Then Eli answered and said, Go in peace, and the God of Israel grant thee thy petition that thou hast asked of him. And she said, Let thine handmaiden find grace in thy sight. So the woman went her way and did eat, and her countenance was no more sad. And they rose up in the morning early and worshipped before the Lord, and returned, came to their house in Ramah. And Elkanah knew Hannah his wife, and the Lord remembered her. Wherefore it came to pass, when the time was come, about after Hannah had conceived, that she bare a son, and called his name Samuel, saying, Because I have asked him of the Lord. And the man Elkanah and all his house went up to offer unto the Lord the yearly sacrifice and his vow. But Hannah went not up, for she said unto her husband, I will not go up until the child be weaned. And then I will bring him, that he may appear before the Lord, and there abide forever. And Elkanah her husband said unto her, Do what seemeth thee good. Tarry until thou hast weaned him. Only the Lord establish his word. So the woman abode and gave her son suck until she weaned him. And when she had weaned him, she took him up with her, with 3 bullocks, 1 ephah of flour, and a bottle of wine, and brought him into the house of the Lord in Shiloh. And the child was young. And they slew a bullock, and brought the child to Eli. And she said, O my Lord, as thy soul liveth, my Lord, I'm the woman that stood by thee here, praying unto the Lord. For this child I prayed, and the Lord hath given me my petition, which I ask of him. Therefore also I have lent him to the Lord. As long as he liveth, he shall be lent to the Lord. And he worshiped the Lord there. Let's pray. Father, we do thank you for your word, for its power, and for your presence. And we claim your promise that the word will never return empty or void, always accomplishing that for which you sent it forth and prospering thereby. So may all of our hearts and minds be open, our ears receptive to what you have for us this day. And Lord, as decisions are made, we pray that everyone would bring praise and honor and glory to the Lord Jesus, for he alone is worthy. And his people said, Amen. Great. This morning, it's my privilege to introduce to you the Pattersons, ladies who were in the auditorium for the Bible study hour. Met Miss Dorothy already. I was sitting there reminiscing a little bit, and it's been 35 or 36 years since the Lord blessed you by bringing me into your lives. I shared the other night that I know why he brought Paige into my life, but for years he's been wondering, Lord, why did you put him in mine? Well, I was doing real well until this morning. Years and years ago at a former church, I befriended their children, and they would rather have come out there to be with us than any place in town. And we had such a great time. But when Paige said this morning that his youngest, his daughter, who is still a teenager in my mind, now has teenagers, I was devastated because my dear friend is getting older and older. And that hurts me. Dr. Patterson is now the president of Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. He has written more books than I've prepared sermons, and he's been a blessing not to just our church, but all across this country, and not only this country, but some 126 countries around the world. And I just encourage you to give a warm welcome to my friend, Paige Patterson.
Well, sweet pastor, I'm not sure what to say about that. When he says that I've written more books than he has preached sermons, than he has prepared sermons, I'm not sure whether we need to pray for him because of his propensity to exaggerate into a full-fledged lie like that, or whether or not we need to think that he actually has never prepared that many sermons. I don't know which to hope for. I will tell you this, though. I rejoice in the Lord when God brought Pastor Butch into my life, because I met his wonderful, sweet wife. And all of these years, I've been able to pray for her as no other woman I know. Dear me, what a cross to bear all through life. But she has done it wonderfully well, and we thank you so very much. As a matter of fact, we brought along a little something for you today. I didn't bring along anything for Butch, but we did bring along something for you because my wife's latest book, look at that thing. This is a study Bible for women. And the print isn't dry on this one yet. This one came in last week. And it's a whole series she's done, a one-volume commentary on the Old Testament for women, a one-volume commentary on the New Testament for women, and now the study Bible. There'll be several more books coming out if she lives long enough on these various aspects of the Bible. But this is a study Bible for women. It'll be available for you within a few days. It'll be in your local bookstore or on Amazon. And you can get it, and I hope, ladies, you will, because it is prepared entirely by Mrs. Patterson and her students at Southwestern in the Women's Studies program, and it is written from the viewpoint of a woman approaching the Bible. There's some pretty harebrained things in here. But in any event, come up here and let me just give you this, and I hope it blesses your heart. God bless you. Okay, and I know you'll enjoy it. Well, it is a joy to be back with you always, to see what God is doing in this wonderful place. I hope you realize, I know you do, that this is unique in all the world. And it's hard for me to imagine that Butch Ikels had an idea like this, but he certainly did, and it's a gloriously wonderful one, and you're a great testimony to the power and grace of God in our communities, and please keep it up. Keep on serving the Lord faithfully, and with the arena back here now, what a marvelous thing. Good night. What's going to happen? My dog already has petitioned me to attend the Purina event. And so I don't know what we'll do. But anyway, keep up the great work and use that for the glory of God, as I know you will. Now today, I want to talk with you for a few minutes on the subject, trouble. A lot of you tonight or this morning have trouble in your life right now. And if perchance you don't have any trouble in your life, if you'll just hang around for a little while, you'll have trouble in your life. And if you don't have any trouble in your life right now, it's only because the real trouble just got over with, and you've got a respite for a few days before more trouble comes. But there is always trouble in the world. My friend John Edmund Haggai wrote a book many, many years ago. And in that book, he told a delightful story of when his children were very small. He was gone overseas preaching a crusade. His wife was home alone. And she had her children, and she had several other children from the neighborhood in. And they were all playing together. It was a glorious hubbub. You can imagine, with a house full of kids, just pandemonium. And she was working away in the kitchen, preparing the meal, and she suddenly became aware of the fact that it was very quiet. And when you got a bunch of kids in the house, quiet is not a good sign. And she began to think about the fact that it had been some time since she had heard a voice of any kind. She looked around the house, and she couldn't find a kid anywhere. She went to the back door, and she looked out, and sure enough, she found them. There were about 8 of them in a very tight circle, on hands and knees, out in the backyard, right up against the back fence. And she thought, that's peculiar, because no one was talking, nobody was making a move, nothing was going on. She thought, I'm just going to slip out there very quietly and see what's happening. And so, with great stealth, she slipped up behind them until she got right to where they were, and she looked cautiously over to see what it was that had so occupied their attention. To her horror, she saw that they had discovered a small colony of skunks. There were about 8 small skunks there. She reacted as any good thinking mother would. She screamed, "Run!" And that's exactly what they did. each one grabbed a skunk and ran. The crazy thing about life is that that's how we live. We run and take our skunks with us. We run and carry our troubles with us. Let's see about that in the story that is before us that Brother Butch read. First of all, he did a pretty good job on these names, didn't he? I would never have attempted to say all those sesquipedalian words. But Brother Butch attempted it and did a good job at it. So there was a certain man of a big name in the mountains of Ephraim. And his name was Elkanah, the son of another big name, the son of another big name, and so forth. And, oh my, he had 2 wives. Trouble. 2 wives. The name of the one was Hannah, and the name of the other was Peninnah. Now Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. Now, in order to fully understand the nature of this skunk she's carrying, you need to understand that it was a very different situation. In those days, children were the sign of the blessing of God. If a woman had a child, she was greatly blessed of God. If she had 2, God had overwhelmingly blessed her. If she had 3, she was the envy of all around. If she had 4, nobody could imagine what her blessings must be. And if she had 5, she was entirely biblical, because happy is the man who has his quiver full, and an Egyptian quiver of arrows is 5. So some of you need to go home and get busy. But for Hannah, she had no children. And that was a sure sign of the judgment of God as far as the populace was concerned. Now, you may rest assured that people were very kind to Hannah when they saw her in public. They met her at the market. "Hi, Hannah, how you doing?" But she heard him behind her back. Wonder what Hannah did when she was a teenager, that God has judged her and closed her womb. And in this case, there was no question about the fact that it was Hannah, not Elkanah, because he had a bunch of kids by Peninnah. So everybody knew who the culprit was. Now, I will admit to you that in that day and time, it never would have occurred to anybody to blame Elkanah anyway, but be that as it may, it was obvious in this case. And Hannah had to live with that every single day. Well, the man went up every year from his city to worship and sacrifice to the Lord of hosts in a place that we call Shiloh. In the Hebrew tongue, it's Shiloh. So you say it whichever way you want to. But he went up to Shiloh, or Shiloh, which is where the tabernacle was prior to the building of the temple in Jerusalem. And so he went up there, and Eli was the high priest, and Hophni and Phinehas were the priests of the Lord who were there. And by the way, the mention of Hophni and Phinehas means trouble. They were priests who were not really with the hearts toward God. They were selfish priests. Not every time do you find a pastor who is a godly man. As much as it's painful me to say anything good about your pastor, it is unusual to find a pastor like him who loves the Lord his God with all of his heart and mind and soul. Unfortunately, far too often God's servants are tainted with the ways and the prospects of the world. And that was Hophni and Phinehas. And so there's trouble. Well, whenever the time came for Elkanah to make an offering, he would give a portion to Hannah, or to Peninnah, his wife, and to all of her sons and her daughters. But to Hannah, he would give a double portion, because you see, it's inevitable. You can't love them both equally. That's why God said, one will do you. You're not going to need more than one. More than one, you won't be just. You won't be fair. You won't love them equally. And he didn't. And so he gave a double portion to Hannah, which irritated Peninnah. And this was true even though, as it turns out, we find out, indeed, the Lord had closed her womb. Well, what happened next? More trouble. Her enemy, her rival, also provoked her severely. Why did she do that? Just to make her miserable. You ever had anybody like that in your life? They were just there to irritate you. And so far as you can tell, there's not another reason in the world why God allows them to continue living except just to irritate you. Now that's what Peninnah did. Just to be irritable, she irritated her. Oh my goodness, what a life she has to live. So it was year by year when she went up to the house of the Lord that Peninnah would provoke her, especially then. Consequently, Hannah wept and did not eat. Oh, well, Elkanah can take care of it. What's this? Then Elkanah, her husband, said to her, Hannah, why do you weep? Why will you not eat? Why is your heart so grieved? Am I not better to you than 10 sons? That is superb masculine logic, otherwise known as terminal world-class stupidity. Give me a break, man. Don't you get it? Can't you live with your wife's situation a little bit? She's not impressed with you being better to her than 10 sons. She needs a child. Get with it, man. Come on, what's wrong with you? Oh, the logic of you men. Dear me. Now, what I want you to see here today is that there were 3 things going on with Hannah. And she couldn't do anything about any of them. First of all, I want you to see that Hannah had a circumstance she could not overcome. No matter what she did, she could not have a baby. There were no obstetricians to go to in those days who treated infertility. And so if you couldn't have a baby, you couldn't have a baby. She had a circumstance that she could not change anyway in the world. Not only that, but she had, in addition to a circumstance she couldn't change, an enemy that she couldn't placate. Now, she could have put a spider in her coffee. But the problem is that would have done nothing but to make the situation ever more worse. Then she would have been a murderer. Then Elkanah would not have loved her. All kinds of problems would have erupted. She could not take the matter to Elkanah. He's already demonstrated he doesn't understand. He's not going to understand. Come on, ladies. He's a man. Give him a break. He can't help it. He'll never get it, okay? And so, no use taking the problem to him. She has an enemy she can't placate. And finally, she has a hurt deeper than life itself that she cannot heal. A circumstance she can't change, an enemy she can't placate, and a hurt she cannot heal. How many of you are in a similar situation this morning? You got one or more of those? You got an enemy that you just can't do anything about? Have you got a hurt that's so deep that there's no way to assuage the grief that's associated with it? You got a child that's breaking your heart? You got a parent that doesn't love you like he or she ought to? Have you got a marriage that even though it's hung together, it's more like hanging separately than hanging together? Have you got a situation at work where you got to keep on because you got to put bread on the table, but every relationship is wrong? Have you got any circumstance in your life, or some of you today dealing right now, as I know you are, with a battle with cancer? How many of you are struggling right now with some other debilitating illness, an autoimmune disorder of some kind, or this or that or the other? How many of you have lost a precious loved one, a precious child, and you grieve over it until this day? And somebody says, well, in time you'll get over it, but you don't get over it. You move on, you have to, but you never get over the grief that is there. And is that you today? Does that represent your situation? Well, they went up to the temple of the Lord, and according to the text, Eli is the priest sitting on the seat by the doorpost, and Hannah goes up to pray. And she is in bitterness of soul, and she prayed to the Lord and wept in anguish. And as she did so, she made a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if you would indeed look upon the affliction of your handmaiden and remember me. Do you see that phrase? Lord, remember me. 7 billion people on the planet. And she has the temerity to say, Lord, would you remember me? Did that ever shock you? That with 7 billion other people, God knows your name? When no newspaper knows your name, and incidentally, I can tell you from experience, be grateful for that and thank the Lord. But nobody knows your name, but God does. God knows all about you, including all that you'll do next. God knows it all. Lord, remember me, and look on the affliction of your maidservant. Remember me, your maidservant. But if you will give your maidservant a male child, I am prepared to make a vow to you today, dear God. I will give that boy back to you all the days of his life. Furthermore, he shall have the most sacred vow in all of Judaism. He will be a Nazirite, and no razor will come upon his head. Well, it happened as she was praying, trouble. You mean to tell me you can get in trouble while you're praying? Well, you're about as likely to get in trouble then as any other time I can think of, to be honest with you. And so, sure enough, she gets into trouble praying. Because you see, as she's praying continually, her mouth is moving, but nothing escapes her lips. Hannah spoke in her heart. Her lips moved, but her voice was not heard. And therefore, Eli concludes that she's drunk. If that's not a mess, I never saw it. I mean, when you come to church expecting at least the preacher to have sympathy, and instead he jokes about your age. And it's a dagger in your heart, you know, it just hurts so bad. And so, I mean, even the preacher is on your case. Well, that's exactly what happened to Hannah. Eli looks at her and he says, Hannah, how long are you going to keep hitting the bottle? She says, don't count me a daughter of Belial. What does that mean? Well, the word Belial or Belial, as I think it was, version he read, you see it a number of different ways, but it basically means the worthless one, a daughter of the worthless one. But gradually, down through Hebrew history, that had become a synonym for Satan. And so she said, don't count me to be a daughter of Satan. That's not the case. And she goes ahead and confesses the whole thing to me. Do not consider your maidservant to be a daughter of Satan, for out of the abundance of my complaint and grief I have spoken until now. And Eli, realizing his mistake, and looked to God, and then he answered and said, Woman, go in peace, and the God of Israel grant your petition which you have asked of him. And she, in faith believing, said, Let your maidservant find favor in your sight. And the woman went her way, and she ate, and her face was no longer sad. Now, we're going to return to that in a minute, but I want you to get the end of the story first. She goes home. The Bible says that Elkanah knew his wife. Now, for those of you who don't pick up on subtleties, that does not mean that he just got acquainted with her. Hi there, Hannah, I'm Elkanah. No, that's not what it's talking about here. I mean, this is used to apply to sexual intimacy. But that's no accident, folks. Did you realize that the way God designed sexual intimacy, it is actually an act of knowledge? It was God's plan from eternity for one man to know one woman in a relationship that he knew nobody else in all the world in that way. And that's the reason why it uses the statement, no. Now, by the way, that's why having sex with a prostitute or something of that nature or an adulterous affair is never what God intended in sex. Because you will never know another woman. In fact, you know that the Bible calls a woman who is not your wife a tzara woman in Hebrew, which means a strange woman. Any woman you have sex relationships with who is not your wife is a strange woman. And beware about strange women. When you have a relationship with a strange woman, strange things happen to you. Okay? And you won't like them. And so you are to know one woman, know one man, and so he knew her. As a matter of fact, let me take it a step further and tell you that that act of sexual intimacy is actually an experience of worship. You say, do what? That's exactly right. It's an experience of worship in which we act out what we have done before God. The Bible says, for this cause shall a man leave his mother and father. That's a public, religious, civil ceremony of marriage in which we leave mom and dad. We're no longer obligated to them first and foremost, but we have a new first obligation, and that's the one to whom we're married. We leave mother and dad. We cleave unto our wife. That is, we become spiritually one with her. And then they two become one flesh. What does that mean? That means they act out the marriage in sexual intimacy, an act of worship. Now, the fact that it's an act of worship doesn't mean you got to sing Just As I Am through the whole thing or pray or something like that, but it does mean that it is an act of worship unto God. You see how sex with anybody else cannot possibly be an act of worship. An act of sex with anybody else is a slap in the face of God. But an act of sexual intimacy with your husband or wife is an act of worship, offering up to God exactly what He planned and purposed to happen. Isn't that amazing? So Elkanah knew his wife. You say, now how'd you know that knew means that? Because the next thing is, she conceived. Now I guarantee you that didn't happen on no handshake either, all right? And so she conceived and bore a son, and she called his name in the Hebrew tongue Samuel. We say it's Samuel, Samuel, because she had been heard of God. God heard her prayer. Because I have asked him, she said, from the Lord. As she said to Elkanah, I'm not going up again to Shiloh until I've weaned the child. Normally, a Hebrew child was weaned at 4 to 5 years of age. And so they nursed for a long, long time. And so she said, I will not go up till I wean him. And he said, fine. The day came when she had weaned Samuel. And so she took all the necessary accoutrements and she goes up to Shiloh. And there she slaughtered a bull and offered him as a sacrifice. And she brought the child to Eli. Now Eli's an old man. He doesn't see very well. But she said to him, O my Lord, as your soul lives, my Lord, I am the woman who stood by you here praying to the Lord. And for this child I prayed. And the Lord has granted me my petition which I asked of him. Therefore I also have lent him unto the Lord. As long as he lives, he shall be lent to the Lord. So they worship the Lord there. And you know the rest of the story. Samuel lived there with Eli until Eli died. And Samuel became the first of the prophets. The first of the long line of prophets of God that included Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, Hosea, Joel, Amos, Jonah, all the prophets of God. The first one was Samuel. She left him with the Lord God. Now you make no mistake about it. She would love to have taken Samuel home. She would love, like Peninnah, to have seen him grow up into a teenager. She would love to have had the opportunity to have attended his recitals and to have gone to his showing of his prize goat. She would love to have done all that, but she was remembering the Lord. She remembered a time when she had no son. She remembered a time when she ached and hurt every moment. She remembered a time when she desperately cried out to God for His intervention. And because she remembered, she said, I'll now not forget that I promised my child to God, and I bring him here, Eli, to you today. Here is Samuel, my son. There is no way to live in life very long without experiencing something that you cannot change, without having an enemy you can't placate, without having a hurt that is so deep it cannot be healed. But may I tell you today, in closing, the choices that you have. Like Haggai's children, you can grab a skunk and carry it with you. You can go through all of life with that agony of soul and spirit. It's your choice. God's not going to force you to do a thing about it. You can do that, and let me tell you what will happen. After a while, the antagonism you feel toward the enemy will turn into bitterness. After a while, the hurt that is so deep you cannot heal it will metamorphose into bitterness. And the situation and the circumstance that you can't change in your life will meet you around every corner until you become bitter about it. When you become bitter about it, you don't realize it at first, but the bitterness is ultimately toward God. God, why did you allow this to happen? Why do you allow them to continue on in my life? Why do you allow me to hurt so deeply and profoundly over this? Lord, it is your fault, and I am bitter toward God. You wouldn't say it, but the fact is that that's the truth. And you know what else that bitterness does? As that bitterness eats away at your soul, it destroys every happy relationship you have. Nobody wants to be around you, not really. People do. Your family kind of hangs around and hopes for the best. Folks at church are told they have to, so they put up with you, and on it goes, but nobody seeks you out just to be around your wisdom and just to be infected with your joy. And nobody does that because, frankly, you've become bitter and you're no fun to be around in your bitterness. Not only that, but it poisons everything you touch. You know, you can take the finest piece of steak that's available. Beautiful, large piece of steak. And you're as hungry as you can be. And you're all ready to bite into it. And somebody just pours a little strychnine on it. And go ahead and eat. You'll shove it away. I don't care how hungry you are. You won't touch it. Every good thing has been poisoned when you are bitter in your heart and spirit. Hannah realized that. She took the only alternative. The Bible says, take your burden to the Lord and leave it there. Take your burden to the Lord and leave it there. Take your bitterness to God and leave it there. Bring it to the Lord, who alone can do something about it, and bring it to Him with the promise from God that He will do something about it. You say, well, is He going to do like He did with Hannah and give her her exact wish and give her her son? Not necessarily. But I do want to promise you He'll heal your soul. I do want to promise you that what He does give you will turn out to be sufficient. I do want to promise you that He is the only one who can speak comfort to your sorrow. He is the only one who can bring healing to your hurt. And He is the only one who can handle every situation. So look at what she does, and we're through. Hannah prayed before the Lord and wept in anguish. And she even went so far as to make a commitment of her own. She said, Lord, if you'll see fit to give me a son, I won't count him as mine. I'm going to give him back to you. She made a commitment of her own. And then, when God came through, she remembered her promise. How many times have you promised God something? Lord, if you'll just do this, well, I'll do the other. God, if you'll help me here, I'll do this. Have you kept those promises? I wonder today. When I first knew her, Dorothy Faye Mendenhall was not supposed to live another year. She lived down in Groves, Texas, Golden Triangle area. Pastor had said to me, I was at that time a 16-year-old evangelist, and he had said to me, well, Paige, I'll come by and get you in the morning. We're going to go by and see a young lady, and she'll pray for you. I was offended by all of that. First of all, I was a brilliant young preacher. All the little old women in the church came by and patted my red head, said I was an ex-Billy Graham. I felt certain they were right. And so the audacity of taking the evangelist on a pastoral visit offended me. And then if I'm not real certain, I think he said, she will pray for you. I'm a preacher. I did the praying. Certainly some woman praying for me didn't appeal to me. But unfortunately, when I'm with a pastor, I believe in pastoral authority. Even with Brother Butch, I have to do what he says when he says it. So, all right, I'll be ready. So 10 o'clock next morning, he came by and got me. We went by Dorothy Faye's house, a little white frame house, poor house. And Brother Frank walked up the door, and knocked on the door. Said, Dorothy Faye, Brother Frank, coming in. Now, my daddy taught me a little about visitation before that, and he'd said, don't ever do that. No, don't walk in till somebody comes to the door and invites you in, otherwise you might be coming back out pretty quick. And so don't do that. But Brother Frank walked in, and so I slipped in behind him, and then it got more unreal. He turned right and walked into Dorothy Faye's bedroom. I was stunned. But I was going to be more stunned when I saw her. When I looked at her there, she was nearly a quadriplegic. She had a little movement in her hands with her fingers twisted and gnarled. But that was it. She'd never been out of bed since the day she was born. She lay there, eventually, till she was more than 68 years old. Before she went on to be with the Lord. She was never supposed to make 8 years, but she did. And Dorothy Faye's speech had been affected by it too. I couldn't understand her at first. I had to listen very, very carefully until I began to catch the cadence of her speech and be able to understand what she was saying. And we visited with her for about 15 minutes, and Brother Frank said, well, Dorothy Faye, just wanted you to meet the evangelist. We're going to have to run along, but before we leave, wonder if you'd mind praying for Brother Paige. And I'm thinking, dear God, if I ever saw anybody that needed prayer, it's this poor girl. What does he mean? Will she pray for the evangelist? He's out of his tree. And I'm thinking that, and Dorothy Faye begins to pray. I got to tell you, I never saw anything like it. It was like she took those little weakened arms and reached up and grabbed hold of the curtains of glory and pulled them back. The light of heaven shone into that room, and I was stunned, and I suddenly found myself doing something that no self-actuating 16-year-old football player ever likes to be found doing. I was weeping uncontrollably and didn't know why, but I did know God was in the room, and I risked one eye, looked to see if I could see him. It was so real. She prayed, and when she finished praying and said amen, I blurted out, Dorothy Faye, will you pray for me every day? And she said, no. I blurted out, why not? She said, oh, Brother Frank, show him my calendar. And Brother Frank reached over and picked up a large calendar off of the bedside table, and he began to thumb through it. And for 18 hours, every single day, at every half hour, there was somebody else's name or some object of prayer in there. I leaped through it until I found my birthday, October the 19th. Would you believe I found one empty slot? I said, Dorothy Faye, if I found one empty slot and I put my name there, would you pray for me on that day? She said, Brother Paige, I didn't know I had any places left. I said, you sure do. Didn't tell her I just erased the name. No, I didn't. I said, you do. She said, well, put your name in there and I'll pray for you. Man, I wrote it in there. She could have seen it from the other side of the room. And sure enough, every year on my birthday for years after that, I received a card Dorothy Faye Mendenhall just saying that she was praying for me. And I was so grateful to God. We walked out of the house, and as we were walking to the car, I said, Brother Frank, I don't understand this. Something's going on here I don't know. He said, well, Brother Paige, as you know, we baptize about 300 a year. That was in the old days when folks weren't reaching that many people. I said, I know, Brother Frank, it's the most amazing thing in the world. He said, we can directly account for half of those through Dorothy Faye Mendenhall. I said, how? He said, well, number one, if somebody comes to Dorothy Faye and gives her a name of a lost person and says, pray for that person, they may as well just head on down to the church and get in their baptismal stuff because they're about to be baptized. They're coming to the Lord. She prays them right in the kingdom of heaven. But he said, in addition to that, he said, it's amazing. She said, people forever drive by the house. He said, just day before yesterday, a man drove past in a delivery truck, pulled over, knocked on the door, came in and said, ma'am, sorry to bother you. I have no idea why I'm here. I've got no package for you, but I was driving by and I just suddenly was overcome by the feeling that I needed to step in here. Do you know why I'm here? And Dorothy Faye said, sit down. I'll tell you why you're here. And she'd lead them to faith in Christ. Never got to go to church, but just sat right there and led more than 50 people a year to Christ in her own home. Now, I'll tell you what, Dorothy Faye Mendenhall would love to have been Hope. She would love to have run around and played girls volleyball. She would love to have entered the spelling bee. She would love to have done all the things that all of us have gotten to do. But she made a decision early in life that she wouldn't be bitter and that she would take it to God. And I want to tell you what, today, she's running around all over heaven. She's not impeded at all. And I want to tell you that she lived one of the greatest lives in the history of the human family because she learned how to leave it with God. With our heads bowed and our eyes closed, please, nobody looking around. In just a moment, we're going to stand to sing our hymn of invitation and appeal. Precious pastor of this church is right here at the front today. I want to talk just a brief second to those of you who've come this morning and you don't really know Christ as your Savior. You know who I'm talking to. Now look, I didn't say you weren't a church member. Didn't say you weren't a church member here. Didn't say you hadn't been baptized. Didn't say you didn't live a good life. I don't know what kind of life you live. Maybe good, maybe awful. I don't know. But I do know this. I do know that this world is made up of two kinds of people. Those who have come with a broken heart to Jesus and said, Dear Lord, heal my heart and forgive my sin. And those who live a disappointed life and will die a more disappointing death. Which are you today? Which are you today? When we begin to sing in just a moment, I'm going to ask you to slip out from where you're sitting and come give your hand to the pastor and say, Pastor, today I'm bringing it all to Jesus. Today I receive him as my Savior. Would you do that today? It'd be the greatest day of your life, the beginning of life. That's why the Bible calls it a new birth. You start over today. Would you do that, dear friend? Now I want to extend the invitation one more way. Today there are literally hundreds of you who have a deep hurt in your heart today. You're saved, you're born again, you know the Lord. But today there's a hurt you can't heal, an enemy you can't placate, a circumstance you can't change, and it's eating your heart away. I'm going to ask you to bring it to God today. I'm going to ask you to come, not speak to Brother Butch unless God just wants you to for some reason, but otherwise, this is between you and God. To come kneel all across the front here and bring it to God. Tell Him, Lord, I can't change this, so I bring it to you today, and I leave it here. I leave it here. I leave it here. I'm going to walk out leaving it here. And after all of you've gone today, we're going to sweep it all out. It'll be gone forever. Will you bring it to God and leave it with Him this morning? Heavenly Father, in these next few moments, would you do a miracle in our hearts? Lord, there's so many here who've never trusted you. They've never come to the most basic moment of leaving everything with Jesus. God, help them today to slip out from where they're sitting, make their way here, and receive the Lord this day. And Father, there's so many of us today carrying a heavy burden. And God, we can keep carrying it like Hannah was, or then we can decide today, like Hannah, I'm going to take it to God. Understood or misunderstood, I'm going to take it to God. And Lord, I know that you will take it and heal. So I pray today that they would come from all over the building and do what God says. In Jesus' name we pray. Would you stand with us with heads bowed and eyes closed?
If you don't know where you will spend eternity, call Pastor Ikels, and he will clearly explain how to be saved and know for sure that you are saved. God bless and have a wonderful day.